In this video, we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of building media queries. And along the way, I will be reviewing some of the things we've discussed about the role of media queries and the importance of them, but we're going to focus on technique here. So I want to direct your attention before we get started to the Lesson 9 notes in Blackboard. And basically everything I present here will be drawing on these notes, and in particular drawing on a couple coding resources that I have listed here for you. One of them that introduces and explains and models the CSS media rule, and one that discusses how lists are used as the underlying structure for most menus in contemporary web design, and we'll get to that. But here I want to mainly emphasize that this resource is here, it's essential, it doesn't just supplement this presentation, it's a required part of it if you're going to pull this project off. So head over there, schedule some time to read these notes carefully, and you'll see that they overlap with things that I presented, but there's also some new material here as well. Then carefully review the project assignment. Make sure that you meet all the criteria. Study the grading rubric so you know where to focus your energy in meeting the specs for the project. As a working professional, I can tell you that I learn and relearn every day the critical importance of really knowing the specs for a project and matching them. So with that as a basic overview, we're going to jump now to that W3 Schools resource that introduces the media query rule, and this is a great way to, as with most of the tutorials at W3 Schools, they're fantastic, but a great way to introduce yourself to media queries. And I'm going to share this link. By the way, don't wander off. A lab is coming, and you're going to get into groups, and you're going to work with this very project here. So stay focused. So I'm going to click on the try it yourself here so that we can examine. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. The problem with zooming in is I disrupt how the media query rule works. So I think we're going to have to go with a little bit small type here, and I'll keep this a high resolution video so that the code's pretty easy to read. So here what I want to introduce is, first of all, that we have a viewport meta tag, and this tag forces mobile phones not to rescale content. So historically, before media queries were very widespread in web design, a lot of designers really didn't bother to create separate content that worked well in a mobile phone. I know that seems crazy now, but reality evolves faster than coding culture. So that's what happened. And in order to deal with that, phones rescaled, they downsized content so that it would fit within a phone. We don't want content downsized. We are going to be creating separate content for a phone and separate content for laptop, desktop. So this viewport meta tag, and you can get it here, you can just Google for viewport meta tag, tells browsers, hey, do not rescale the content of this page no matter what the width of the device is. Okay, if it doesn't fit, just keep reading. That's your instruction to the browser. So then the browser is going to encounter in the style element a media query, and that media query will tell the browser if the user's interface matches these criteria, then apply this different styling. So before I get into kind of breaking this down, Let me just walk through the code bit by bit. So we've got a style element within a page. This is embedded CSS. Works the same way in external CSS, but we're using an embedded example here just to keep things simple. And here's a definition for the body tag. Nothing you haven't seen before. It just defines a background color for the body tag. Then comes our media query. So the @media is how every media query begins. The only screen element of the media query definition tells devices that this only applies on screens and not in print. And that's useful for very complex media queries that also provide a printer-friendly styling. But it's pretty esoteric and we won't focus on it. It's important that you're aware that there is such a thing. Yes, people still print stuff, but we're not going to focus on that. And then the second criteria, which is really the relevant one, is that this media query only kicks in viewports of 600 pixels or smaller. Now, 600 pixels is a large phone. And my experience is that it's more effective to define media queries for phones to kick in at 480 pixels, or better put, for a media query for a phone to kick out, to not be applicable once a viewport gets larger than 480 pixels. But before we do anything, we'll just examine how this template code from W3 Schools works. So if I click on the divider here and resize this window to less than 600 pixels, we can see that the new style for the body tag kicked in and a light blue background kicked in. Now let me make some changes, and again, stay focused because I'm going to hit pause soon. I'm going to break you into groups, and you are going to be doing this. So let me first of all change that. The terminology we use here is a breakpoint. I've discussed this, it's in the reading. Breakpoints are, for media queries, are when do you want to apply a new style. So the most basic set of breakpoints is just one for phones, and then by default everything else is laptop style. Complex websites, large-scale professional websites, will have multiple media queries for low-budget phones, for high-end phones, for tablets, for TVs, and so on. But overwhelmingly, and our focus will be on just one media query that creates a new style for phones. So I'm going to change the breakpoint to 480 pixels and hit run. And when I do that, then the media query element has to be resized so that it's smaller before the phone style kicks in. Now, one thing that's a little bit of a tangent here, but it's on the theme of the intersection of technology and culture. Dark backgrounds with light text, they evolved because they're easier on the eye for coders, and the coders were the first to adopt these. But they're also, and I think we may have discussed this in class, but I'll remind you, and actually I don't think we have. Dark backgrounds and light text save battery life. Think about it. If all you have to do with your phone battery, or if all your phone battery has to do is light up text against a black background, that's a lot less light bulbs to turn on, metaphorically speaking, than dark text on a bright white background. So for a lot of reasons, dark backgrounds and white text have become popular. So let me just fake this here with a black background and a color, and that then makes this a little more readable outside. Now I'm also going to change the font size for phones. Maybe make that let's test everything. Test each line before I make changes. That was a little intense, so maybe we'll dial that down to 1.5, see if it's still effective. Still more readable, and I might even decide that, you know what, that serif font works okay in laptop, desktop, but it's unreadable in a phone, and decide to make my font family sans serif. And finally, maybe a little bit more line height. So that this text is now more readable in a phone. And if someone's looking at this on a very large screen, then maybe the original font is acceptable. But we're focusing on making the content in mobile devices more accessible. I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to create a class style laptop called laptop. Now I haven't actually created the class style yet. I've only created some HTML that's going to use that class style, but I'll catch up and do the class style later. So I've created the class style for a laptop, and then I'll say this text is only visible in a laptop. And then in the mobile style, let me make sure I've got this the way, my brackets the way they should be. I'll create that laptop style, and I will make display none operative. So I don't see that content in a mobile phone, but I do see it in a desktop. And we discussed that sometimes it is appropriate to have less content in a phone. Or alternatively, you can have separate content in a phone. I could have just as easily hidden text. Hint, hint, this is a hint for the upcoming project. I'll say it more slowly. I could have just as easily set this up to display text only in a phone if I wanted to. And if I wanted to do that, well, I think you can figure it out. So I'm going to hit pause on the video now, and I'm going to break you guys up into groups and give you, we'll try 20 minutes. I want you to go to that same try it editor, and I turned it into a tiny URL so you can get there quickly and easily. I'll paste this URL into the chat. And I want each group to do the following. I want you to change the mobile display to large type, a dark background, and a light font color. Of course, you cannot use the same ones I just did. I want you to create a message that appears only in laptops, and I want you to create a message that appears only in phones. So I'm going to hit pause now. I'm going to break you into groups. I'm going to share that URL. I'll give you some time to work on this. Class participation for today is based half on this project. So I'm going to give you time to do it. I'll check in, see how you're doing, and I will pull the plug on the groups when everyone has had enough time to get this done. But I think 20 minutes should give you time to grab some coffee or whatever, a snack, and get with your group and work together on the code. You know I use drop on your team, so I want to hear everybody participating in this. So with that, we'll hit pause on the video, and I'll let you guys get to work. Okay, now I am resuming the video, and we're going to go back to the assignment for this class and for this lesson. And you'll notice that when you get to the rules for the project, that I provided template text, that it's starter text. You're going to be doing serious work with it. But template text for a responsive menu and responsive CSS. Now, before I introduce you to that code, I want to show you something in the other resource that I linked to, and that's right here. And this is a link that I've given you guys. I want you to take some time after this presentation and before you get started on the homework to look this over. This is some background on how and why menus are created using lists. And I'll share the link. I want you guys to read it. I'm going to be presenting some very similar material, but it'll be helpful for you to read this as well. So the next step is to look at, here's what that template looks like. Now it's very simple. And I want to do something. I want to go into our code editor, and I'm using the visual code editor. And here, the first thing I'm going to do is strip off the external CSS and save this file and let you look at how this project looks without any CSS. And in particular, I want you to focus on the menu. So the menu now just looks like an unordered list. This is, I think it's used in all kinds of coding, but it's definitely used in HTML and CSS. You start with a list, and it's a valuable technique and a lot just to be aware of. It's, like I say, very widely applied. So this list, if I go back into my code and relink to my style sheet, becomes a menu. And that menu, if I view it in an iPhone 6 here in Chrome's, what do you call it? Have to remind myself. Yeah, the inspect mode. So here in Chrome's inspect mode, you can see that the menu looks different. It's a set of easy to tap buttons in a smartphone, because, of course, smartphone users can't easily hover over these links. And text links are hard to tap. Big, clumsy fingers like mine, not so easy to do this. With a mouse, no problem. So when you do this assignment, you are going to be customizing this and linking to your actual projects. However, I'm not going to focus on that now. You can, I think, do that by yourselves. I am referring you to this article again that walks through in more detail, a little slower than I'm going to do it here, how to generate a menu that looks like a menu from a list. And so that you end up with this. And then I'm going to turn you loose. So let's go into the code editor and reverse engineer or dissect what I've done. First of all, note that what I have here is an unordered list with an ID. And that unordered list has links to the different menu options. And they are going to appear very differently in a laptop and a smartphone. So let's see the magic of the CSS that makes this happen. And it's not even 20, it's only 26 lines of code, and that includes some comments. So here's our first media query. Now this media query starts at 960 pixels. So what I've done here is I've said if it's not bigger than 960 pixels, then this media query does not apply. So that means this media query will apply to tablets in landscape sideways mode and anything bigger than that, laptops, TVs, whatever. And what I've done with the nav bar here, this is where it all happens. The nav bar, I have turned off the lists, the bullets. So that's what list style none does. I have tweaked the margins. I have floated it left. And then each list item in that nav bar is going to float left, is going to have a margin between it and the next element. So I've turned off my list styles. I've forced them to sort of line up in a row. And then the last two styles just define how links look. But focus on lines 8 and 9. And what line 8 does is line up all those list items in a single row by floating them so that they stack from left to right and define the sizing around them. So that's what created that top menu bar for laptops and desktops. Then here's our media query for smaller devices. And for this media query, this time I've created a breakpoint of 959 pixels so that anything that's smaller than a tablet is going to have, or smaller than a tablet turned landscape. I talked about breakpoints. They can be 480, they can be 600. How do you define when a breakpoint happens? Well, that's a whole discussion that we had a little earlier. But in short, it depends on who your audience is. And if you think you need a separate breakpoint for phones, you can do that. But what I'm doing here is basically saying anything smaller than a laptop or a tablet turned sideways is going to see the mobile display. And for that, I have changed or added to the style for the nav bar. And I have the biggest difference that I've done is I've defined links in the nav bar to display block. So that's not normally the way a list item displays. Normally list items all have their own row, but by display block I force them, they would have their own row. With display block, I am forcing each navigation link onto its own row, and then I'm defining a button with the border radius and the other elements here. And the only reason that I've added a hover effect is so that the hover effect on a phone displays when a user taps on a button. So they get a little bit of interactivity when they tap on it. So that's a breakdown of the code. And then after that, you'll just edit the HTML to make it work. Now, if you decide that you think you'd rather have your breakpoint at 480 pixels so that tablets display the horizontal navigation bar, that's your call. Take initiative with this. Mainly, I want you to focus on making this content conform to communication design principles. So, to review, we are aiming for a page that has a menu bar on top in laptop desktops and then switches to a series of buttons in a mobile device. So beep beep. Okay, so I just heard from Siri that Siri is on it. And with that, I'm going to sign off, see what questions you have, and then let you get started on the homework.